Welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown.
Over the 5 years that affirmative action was banned, before that was kind of repealed, and then they could go back to affirmative action, is actually they did not have any less minority graduates.
Massive stigma against true old school work that, like Jonathan has said, produces so much, right? Even without even going into a trade, going in just to the federal workforce. Jonathan talked about waste management. What's even better than waste management? Have you ever looked into the payment salaries of the Postal Service before?
So the minority communities where they're struggling in whatever situation, whether it's supporting your kids, whether it's being in an environment full of crime, whether it's trying to put food on the table, they obviously need jobs. And they obviously, if they are discriminated at any point throughout their job process, that can definitely ruin the livelihood of everybody they're taking care of. Do you want a great website like this? This is my podcast website where I direct the audience to come to watch the content, listen to the content, read the blogs, and much, much more. If you want to have your own customizable podcast website, then join my affiliate link in my description to sign up for something called Podpage, and they can help you customize an easy podcast website for your personal podcast. Sign up to get a discount now. Again, use the link in my description to join Podpage now. Are you enjoying today's podcast episode? I really hope you do. And I really hope you enjoy the fact that I have an amazing guest talking with me and having this great discussion. If you, as an individual, personally have your own podcast and maybe you want to have great guests on your podcast as well, I got a deal for you. In my description, there is a link to something called Podmatch. Make sure to join that link through my affiliate link so you can sign up to get matched up with other podcast hosts and podcast guests, so you make sure you are never missing an episode without a productive guest to have an amazing conversation with. Podmatch is similar to any other kind of matching site for the most part, and it's super easy to use. Just $6 a month and you can have a guest for each and every podcast episode that is tailored to your specific topic. So again, join the link in my description and join Podmatch now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode number 30 of the Purple Political Breakdown, and we are back at it again. Obviously, I'm going to make sure that I'm recording the audio. I am, so I'm not making the mistake again. And today we're going to be talking about affirmative action. Obviously, there was a lot of buzz about it considering the Supreme Court ruling, but it doesn't really stop there because obviously another aspect of affirmative action revolves around the workplace. So we're going to discuss affirmative action in both aspects, education and the workplace, and all that good jazz. Of course, I have my two co-hosts here today with me, and Jonathan and Paul. So how y'all doing? How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. This time I made sure that I looked up all the quotes that I wanted to quote before, so I have those ready to send you. Some interesting articles that I've been reading, getting ready for this podcast. So I'm excited about this one.
All right, excellent. How you feeling, Paul?
I'm great, man. Thanks for asking. Honestly, I probably won't yield much on this conversation. I'm probably actually agree with Jonathan for a lot of stuff. So still looking forward to talking about it. But yeah.
All right, fair enough. So before we dive into the topic of the day, of course, I'm going to read out a review. Of course, you guys can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or the website, www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com, so you can get shouted out for a future episode, of course. This review's from Juby Jew. They said, in a world where people are getting canceled over the political affiliation, it's refreshing to see a podcast like this. Yeah, of course. Funny thing that this person said that. I don't know if you guys are caught up with it because it's happened on social media. But apparently a lot of progressives are attacking a fellow progressive, and Anna Kasparian.
Yeah.
So I've heard of her, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of progressives are attacking her. So it's like, oh, wow, man, nobody's safe. Even people on the left is not safe. So yeah, that was interesting to say. So, You people get canceled left and right for political affiliation, no matter where you are. But on this podcast, that's not what we intend to do. We don't care about all those labels. We don't care about all that. So let's start off with the what you need to know. What is going on currently in America, or the world, matter of fact. And to start off, we got the unfortunate mass shooting in South Philly that has occurred.
Mm.
I believe 5 people were killed and a couple of people were injured during the 4th of July holiday weekend ish. Also, we got another unfortunate event. Well, to some people, maybe positive. Israel launched an attack that killed 13 Palestinians. Now, I'm sure you guys will have opinions on this. I personally don't have a strong opinion. I don't really have a side I'm picking for, but unfortunate circumstance altogether. Meta launches Threads and Twitter is pissed. Will this new social media platform be the new competitor to the more popular, probably the most popular social media platform, not counting the video ones? So we'll see what happens. Of course, we got the interesting news in the cocaine being found in the White House. I'm sure people have heard that, of course.
An old
And
booger sugar.
yes, great place to have cocaine, the White House. And last one is the a judge in Florida blocks the Florida provision that will limit Latino voter registration, more so immigrants. And there's potential. I didn't look into exactly what the law said, but there's some concern that Florida was trying to pass a law that would kind of infringe on immigrants' rights in terms of voting. So a judge blocked that. So we'll see what happens regarding that moving forward. So a lot of interesting news. What do you guys think about what's going on?
I haven't had much of a chance to scroll through and read about them. I heard about some of those, but I did get to play around with the Threads app. It'll be interesting. I think the way they have it set up is it might be feasible competition to Twitter in the future for sure.
I think for the holiday violence stuff, it's like always a real shame. Additionally,
Yeah.
like a 7-year-old girl was killed in Tampa,
Mm.
Florida, just out of the blue, and it just sucks, right? Like on a day where we're supposed to be proud to be Americans, people take other Americans' lives, so it's
Yeah.
nothing that's too great. But yeah, aside from that, I'm going to play defense for the Biden White House, of course. As far as we know, the cocaine was located in a highly civilian traffic area. Thus, I can conclude that it was not from Joseph Biden yet. Okay. Yeah, if it's his son, he's just a goofy.
No, I think it's from his son. I don't think they're claiming that it's Joe's, is it? I thought the claim was always that it was going to be Hunter's.
When anything goes wrong, it's blame Hunter, obviously.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, of course.
He's like the perfect fall guy. And also real guy because he does do it.
Yeah, wasn't there that video where he was driving and he was what was he putting in the system while he was driving?
He was smoking meth and he was going
Meth.
95.
Oh my, like, bro, what?
in the 70s.
What is wrong with this guy? So, and the funny part, I recently I saw on Twitter, because Twitter is such a great platform, right? Donald Trump Jr. was getting exposed too because he was at a gay club doing certain things. So,
Oh, dear.
Was he really?
it wasn't. Apparently, it was. To be fair, I know nothing about the woman he did it. He apparently was a woman.
He was just
he
there
did
to
it
see a
with.
friend.
Oh yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Hey, do your thing, man. Do your thing. No,
I
no
think
judgment
this
here.
is one of our.
2023.
I genuinely have. I feel like we always, for some reason, put our politicians on pedestals, and so we're always like surprised and appalled when they do like bad things. It's like we gave completely average people by every metric of society. These are like the most average people, and we put them up on these pedestals. We give them all this power, all this authority, and we just expect them to like use it appropriately all the time. It's like, and
But
we expect them to
sometimes,
be like perfect individuals all the time.
sometimes they go like way past being an even normal
True.
citizen. I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys remember that one guy. He was really young, like around me and Jonathan's age at least, and
A
he
wheelchair?
became a senator. And
Madison Cawthorn.
he was talking about how all these senators were asking him to join in a bunch of orgies. You guys remember
Yeah,
this?
Madison Cawthorn. Yep. And then he just got blacklisted immediately and never won again. Yep.
So I mean, I don't know. I feel like these politicians,
No,
they into some freaky stuff over there. Yeah.
well, yeah, that's like absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like I think that's a real thing.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. We know this. You know, Jeffrey Epstein. We know this. So, but
Yeah.
with that said, we'll dive into the topic at hand in regards to affirmative action. Like I said, we're going to be talking about it in kind of two fronts. Obviously, the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action in education is unconstitutional. Apparently, they indicated this because it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which states, I'm going to state something for people so no people know actually what's going on. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So this is kind of what they use. They also noted that for the most part, people can kind of like consider race to an extent. They apparently one of the rule or one of the opinions that was said is that you can talk about your life, how race played into your life, but there can't be like dedicated essays or applications for you being a particular race. Is kind of the what
Hmm.
I've saw. They also noted that military academies are exempt from this rule, so they can still use affirmative action, which was interesting. So,
That is interesting.
so I know last episode me and Paul talked about it a little bit, but just so we're all up to speed, what do you guys think about the ruling regarding affirmative action in education?
So I think it's a good thing. I think it is a positive that affirmative action is harder to use. Like you brought up though, John Roberts and his who wrote the majority opinion, he put in that kind of clause that you can still talk about it. So Harvard, pretty much as I understand, immediately set out a memo saying they're going to just give a bunch of credence now to the essay portion when people are talking about how race has affected their life. Well, what they can't have is like explicit questions stating like I'm Asian, I'm white, I'm black. Like they can't like give a lot of credence to those things. Um, so many institutions, I think, will still uh, use affirmative action to the degree that they can. But overall, making it harder, I think, will have a net positive effect.
I think it was bound to happen. The ruling was something I think that was kind of like on a fast track, to say the least. A lot of the stuff that they supposedly uncovered Harvard doing with the Asian students, I think, was pretty damning. It didn't really help any of their case for that of the state. But what I think also is that I think it's kind of partially good because when we needed it, right? Like back in the civil rights days. But then it just fell out of grace, and it just stopped working. Just like for the audience, obviously there's like two narratives on why we signed into or why we allowed like affirmative action to take place. One will tell you that we did it just so we could have basically colleges be more diverse and like have more thought. But the real reason was to boost communities' participation and education. And as a result, this was something that the Democratic Party was very much on board to do to kind of like equal the playing field out. The problem is that back in the day they would do it with poor blacks and middle class blacks, but as time went on, they only did it with upper middle class and upper class blacks for the most part, as well as like kind of like white women that were the beneficiaries of that of affirmative action, and it kind of just started to fail, and it didn't really produce the results that were needed to actually kind of like hit the nail on the head and get the actual results that the Democratic Party initially intended for. So as a result of that, yeah, like I'm kind of, I'm a little bit happy that it's gone. I think it's caused a lot of division in the country, and it's something that wasn't really helping the groups of people I want to help. So, you know me, I throw it overboard. Yeah.
Fair enough, fair enough. And to give a little bit more context on the implementation of affirmative action, there's two executive orders that put it in place. It started off with Kennedy and Executive Order 10925, then moved even further in terms of Lyndon B. Johnson, kind of elaborating a little bit more and kind of what put these situations in place in terms of why people are so dissatisfied was the placement goals aspect of making sure you're hitting certain goals to put specific minorities and women in these spots. And then obviously, fast forward years down the line, we are here, we are, and the disproportionate treatment of, more specifically black minorities compared to even Asian minorities proved just not to work. It didn't work at all. And now we're in a situation where educational institutions won't be implementing it. My question to you, because Paul mentioned it, and I know it's a good point, is that the initial reason why we put it in place is to kind of provide more opportunity for these minorities to catch up for the most part, especially considering the situation they are. Now they're getting rights and everything. We want to put them on a pedestal to kind of even out the playing field. Now that we take this away, first question is, do we think that this will hamper the opportunity or make it unfair for these minority communities? Because we do know that impoverished communities make up mostly black people, make up mostly Latino people. So do we think that after taking this away for these institutions, this will be unfair for these type of people moving forward?
I think it'll have a minor negative effect, but nothing that's really worth of note. The thing that I think is actually really good about this case is that it's going to bring into question legacy families that go into these schools as well, that get into these schools without much application whatsoever. You have a lot of these parents that they went to the school and their kid can get into the school a little bit easier. And I think that this will allow for the limelight to be shown on that. And I think that's going to produce a lot. Sorry for the dog in the background.
Having fun over there. What do you think, Jonathan?
So I think it will have a positive effect. And I can give citations. I have the studies, like I said, I actually have them all ready to send you if you want to put them in there. So there was a couple studies done in the 20 teens. And one of the very famous essays that was kind of two of the people who wrote a lot of the article or did a lot of this research, wrote an article in the Atlantic talking about affirmative action. And what they found was this, specifically using like UCLA as a case study. UCLA passed a mandate or an ordinance in the state of, I think the state of California is the one that actually passed it, pretty much banning affirmative action. And initially, they saw a lot of dropping in admissions from these minorities into UCLA. But what happened over the 5 years that affirmative action was banned before that was kind of repealed and then they could go back to affirmative action is actually they did not have any less minority graduates because they had the minorities who were getting voted into essentially this academy would drop out in a couple of years because they would be from an average of about the 54th percentile to 46th percentile when it comes to GPA, when it comes to just overall academics, while the majority of other people who were getting in of other races were in the 89s to 90s. And so what would happen is they would get put into this class, into this institution that was just above their kind of pay grade, I guess you'd call it. They weren't quite ready for it. But what happened after affirmative action got banned is those people, instead of dropping out, firstly, more black and minorities would actually accept invitations to UCLA who were in that 89th percentile. And more than that, those people who were in the 60s and 70s, they would get into kind of those sister institutions. And then when their GPAs got boosted high, they would actually earn their way into UCLA. And so over the 5-year period, they actually saw no drop when affirmative action got banned in that state, because they would get other ways of getting there actually on their own merit. And so there's actually a surplus of people who would get invited into and would actually make it into on their own merits, but they just had to do it on a little bit of a slower process so they could actually get up. And I could go on for another couple things, but we want to unpack some more of that stuff. There's a bunch of other things that this article pointed out.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, and I saw something similar in regards to California, and that goes hand in hand with the next topic, because at the end of the day, even though all three of us agree that affirmative action, for the most part, in terms of educational institutions, probably is not a good thing overall. It doesn't really benefit the minority communities. It hasn't proven to benefit them by any means, and it is unfair to other communities like the Asian American and even the white community. With that said, we still want to give the minority communities more opportunity. That's the big thing over here. To give them more opportunity, give them the ability without the resources to make it like everybody else. So, one of the things that you mentioned, Jonathan, in regards to that kind of process of achieving through merit is one thing. I know they also talked about how the UC system also utilize something in regards to uh, if you hit a certain percentage in terms of like your schooling, you're automatically get a spot in terms of admission to the school. So the next question basically is for stuff like that, and we can dive into a little bit more of the stuff that Jonathan mentioned. What alternative solutions can we come up with to make sure we're getting giving people who are from the minority communities more opportunity to the point where it kind of equalized compared to the middle or upper middle class?
So I think in some ways we kind of do have that. That is kind of why we have firstly standardized testing. We talked about this before. Not a huge fan of standardized testing, because I think people develop at different rates, but that's kind of what standardized testing is for, your overall GPA, to kind of gauge an assessment on how invested are you kind of in the future of your own education. That's pretty much what GPA is for, is to see like, are you really wanting to continue your education past high school? If so, then you're going to study, you're going to do your academics. I think GPA should in some ways be weighted more heavily than standardized tests. But apart from that, because we know that those are far, far, far from perfect things, we have those sister institutions. So if you want to go to a place like Notre Dame, a place like Ohio State, there's those kind of lower level institutions that will help you get that way. There is, so the law school that I want to go to, which will remain nameless, they have a program as well that I think would be very beneficial to a lot of institutions of higher learning, and they could learn from this. And it's essentially a summer program. So if you don't quite have the LSAT score, don't quite have the GPA that will you will need to get into it, you might qualify for their kind of summer preparation course program, and you apply to that and you get into that, and then they'll help you. And if you go through the curriculum, if you go through that extra material, they'll boost your scores, and then you'll be able to get admitted into the actual academy itself. And I think a lot of places could go with something along those lines.
I think it comes through the financing of like schools in these communities and actually giving the teachers the resources that they need to engage with a lot of these communities, to actually, get them up to par on the level of like these other groups that we were talking about earlier, right? I could also go through like a myriad of different policies to, like help there be like an adequate family unit in the home for these communities as well. But the list can go on and on. The simple fact is the reason why they score so low is just simply because these communities are almost often neglected, right? Some people will tell you, like they'll point to the schools in Baltimore and they'll tell you, Oh, well, like these schools do get a lot of money, right? And yeah, they do, and they're still under resourced. The biggest issue is that um, a lot of the money is like soaked up by like just restoring the infrastructure at the school alone that's been rotting for such a long time. The teachers barely make a dime and have no motivation to actually get out there and teach. So I think this is probably like one of the best ways to actually, kind of go through with old uh, Protestant work ethic of, pulling yourself up, and to do that, just empowering these communities so they could teach their children to get that done and achieve the best result. Of course, I'm fine with selecting slots for minorities as well, right? Especially those are the significantly more disenfranchised, just so we can get up on their feet. But that would probably be only reserved for probably some of the poorest of the poor within them that meet some sort of grade criteria, so they don't drop out.
What do you
But
mean by slots?
sure. So like I'd be fine with like around maybe like 50 to 80 slots per university or something that like scales with student population for students to have a guarantee on the basis of their race. It's something I'm fine with, and it's something I believe is a way
How
to
would that play out practically, though? Like, does there have to be equal representation of each
no,
ethnic group, or
no.
how?
Yeah, it'd be prioritized based on like general socioeconomic status, right? So, for example, like I would give it for poor whites as well, right? So probably like poor whites, poor Latinos, and poor blacks, as well as like some spots for poor Asians. But the big area would probably be between poor whites and poor blacks. Those would be the two communities I would want to like have in service for this. Like, so for example, like for poor whites, I'd probably focus on areas of Appalachia as like a focus area for getting these students into schools and bringing their communities more wealth and new industry. Similarly to that, like for my state of Florida, for the poor blacks, I would want people from Florida City to have guaranteed spots in schools. Obviously, this wouldn't be a massive spot like that of my understanding, and John, you could probably like correct me on this, but the affirmative action seatings were actually pretty large. Like a lot of the guarantees that they gave could really embolden populations to kind of like shift within the schools, right? So like you could have quite a few beneficiaries of affirmative action. Mine is something that's probably a little bit smaller, but would be specifically targeted on communities by the school faculty to do like poverty alleviation in them, right? So like you would look for suitable candidates that could become motivated enough to move back to their communities and actually produce wealth for it. That'd be like
Mhm.
my modem of it.
So for the individuals that kind of acquire said slots,
Hmm.
would you have a GPA threshold? Would you have
Of
a
course. Yeah.
testing
So
threshold?
yeah, so
Okay.
like the number one thing, right, is I don't want these children to actually waste their education, right? That's like the biggest thing. So I still want these students to produce like something of worth through their education. Additionally, this is something like I'll say that a lot of my liberal colleagues will probably sneer and jeer at me. I think that if you are going to take the program, you should be limited to a certain set of majors, right? Probably that of, I'm biased, of course, but something like political science, so you can get into political infrastructure, anything in STEM, of course. And then
No arts. That's what you say.
uh,
No arts. No
some
arts at
arts
all.
like for the musics and stuff like that, but I think the social sciences, I mean, I'm a big
No
skeptic of.
basket weaving.
Yeah, no basket weaving, no
No gender
lesbian dance,
studies.
no lesbian dance theory. Like none of that, right? For me, like I'm a big skeptic of sociology and stuff like that. When I was in university, I sparred with them a lot, and I believe they sink institutions more than float them. So yeah, I'd keep it very limited for these
You'll be
things.
coming for my degree.
Yeah, dude, like you're one of the good ones, Jonathan.
No, I'm criminal justice, which is just one
That's
step
fine.
away. It's
No,
one step away from sociology. It's really just a criminology degree, but you don't get to call yourself a criminologist until you give them like $70,000 more dollars.
sure, but
You get
like
a
Oh
your
yeah.
motive,
PhD.
your
But
motive of research is a lot more like was like antiquated, right? Like it's like it has like more like that like can
it's
actually be replicated. Yeah.
It's a pretty good solid mix of psychology and sociology, I
Yeah,
would say.
exactly. Whereas
So,
sociology is something that I'm sure you've heard of the replication crisis, but we could get to that later. Sorry, I'm diverting.
No, 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 you're good. Very interesting notion regarding the slots. I think that's something. Well, I guess my thing before I kind of dive into that a little bit more, what exactly is the difference between that and affirmative action in general?
So the crux of affirmative action currently is it's something that only works throughout the process of admissions and basically kind of like gives way towards students that can like write about it in their own story. Mine would be significantly more clinical and hands-on, and would be something that is focused by the school administration as an effort of like bringing forth more wealth into these communities. Think of it something like similar to like pro bono when you're in like a law field, where you just like do this thing kind of like to like help a client or something like that, or to like help your firm. This is something I believe is like an ethical thing, an ethical imperative. But furthermore, I think that it's something that can actually yield good benefits for the communities around us, right? To bring more blacks into the middle class is something I believe is um really big piece of the agenda for the Democratic Party, and it's something that I deeply care about. I think this would be the best option. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
definitely
I'm
sounds a much more deliberate way to kind of bring out
correct.
the minority communities. Very similar to the top percentage idea, where it says if once you hit this percentage, you automatically get a spot. So these are outright something that the schools can implement to make sure that the right people are getting into their institutions, and obviously, like you said, not getting swayed by the admission process. And if there's a number cap, it's also making sure that the numbers aren't just like disrupting the overall admissions of individuals going to the institutions in general. It'll be a smaller percentage for the most part, as you said. So
Correct.
it's an interesting idea. Jonathan, you were about to say something?
yeah, so I'm curious about something that Paul said that I'd be curious to get both of your ideas of it. He said that education will get more people into the middle class.
Correct.
Um, so and I totally understand where you're coming from. Obviously, the potential to make money, right, can increase. But what do you guys think about just the concept that education is the only way to get into the middle class instead of something like trades, which right now particularly is paying a lot of money, and it's something that you all have to go to school for like 6 months sometimes, depending on the field that you get into. Do you think pushing people that way would have a good way to, if the goal obviously is to get people of minorities into the middle class, is that not a slightly more feasible way to do it?
You want to go ahead, Riddell?
Yeah, I could go. So I definitely agree to an extent, right? Because at the end of the day, trade school, we've all kind of talked about it when it comes down to plumbers, when it comes down to garbage man. In reality, the perception of these individuals are, oh man, they're doing all the dirty work. But the reality of these individuals are they're actually getting paid quite a decent amount, especially compared to the average citizen. So obviously, the cultural shift of making it a thing that people should do more and more could definitely help these more impoverished communities. Obviously they need to get past their pride. Oh, I want to be a lawyer. Nah, I'm okay with just being a plumber, of course. So that's definitely something. I guess the idea for, or the interesting thing about what you said is that how would you rather, my I guess this is a question to you, Jonathan. Would you rather us push them towards trade, or would you add on trade and whatever the suggestion of Paul said, where you can go into the educational field and do probably maybe a specialty or some other course,
Mhm.
or you can go to the trade field. So having both options versus
Yeah.
the trade option.
So my thing is just it's rather unsettling to me that we're pushing college so much, because kind of the effect, and my dad talks about this a lot, he's been in the academic field for a long time, is the concept of the degree inflation, which I believe we've mentioned before. And that's just, as people keep pushing, oh, go get your degree, go get your degree, the degree per capita is meaning less. So each individual degree means less as more and more and more and more people get it. And the other problem is, I'm not sure if Paul mentioned like a way to, fund that kind of draw system, I guess, or the spot system. They're still going to have to pay for it. And if they're getting these degrees, this is why I think Paul has the great idea of making sure that the degree will be feasible to actually make them
Correct.
money, no basket weaving degrees. But the problem is I will get my degree and then I will go, and if I don't go on to higher education, I'll get my degree, and my degree is no longer a guarantee of a job. So now I have, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 odd dollars of debt, and I don't necessarily anymore even have the guarantee of a job. However, if I go into the trades, then I go and I pay much less for the trade schooling, or at least if it's the same amount, at least have a guarantee of a job, because that is where jobs are lacking right now, is in the trades, because we have this weird stigma which is kind of shifted. Blue collar people used to be the pride and soul of America. Now it's like, oh, we don't really look at them too much, but they make a lot more money. Like, I know a garbage man, at least in my area, makes more money than does a teacher. So we have, and you don't even have to be a garbage man. You can work asphalt, you can work masonry, which is very skilled and craftful labor, which is something that I think we forget about. It still takes a lot of skill to do this kind of things. You still have to go to trade school for it. But there's a weird stigma around that school as opposed to educational school.
Something I wanted to like add is like kind of in our last conversation we had, Adele, like this is kind of like what I talked about in reference to kind of like what happened with this perception of blue collar after the Vietnam War. Like so many people sent their kids to go to school so they wouldn't have to get drafted out, and now it's like generated this
That's a good point.
really, yeah, it's like a nightmare. It's drafted this massive stigma against true old school work that, like Jonathan has said, produces so much, right? Even without even going into a trade, going in just through the federal workforce. Jonathan talked about like waste management. What's even better than waste management? Have you ever looked into the payment salaries of the postal service before? Right? You can make up to $80,000 a year after serving for 2 years in the postal service, right? This is something that is absolutely incredible and full of yielding benefits. And I totally agree, Jonathan, that this should not be the only option. One of the biggest things whenever I work with these kids is the thing I'll tell them is, hey, you know what? I'll be honest with you, man. I don't think you'll be able to really make it. Right now, if you want to have the determination, you want to go through it, then you should, because I thought the same thing
Mhm.
myself. However, that being said, have you ever looked into these other things? Have you ever looked into being a sailor, for example? That's something a lot of kids in Tampa do, right? They like go out on the high seas and like get all their sea time and stuff like that. Have you ever considered
Yeah.
going into aviation? Have you ever considered going into welding? Or the big thing in Florida is mining or agriculture, right? So like these are things I'm always in favor of, right? And I would obviously, be in favor of like stipends for minorities to get into these things as well, right? This is like, me, I'm Mr. Big Government when it comes to this. The only reason why I talked about the higher education stuff, right, is just because the yield is just like so incredible, right? Like if you get into these like specific types of fields, the only exception I make is to that of like political science, right? Because I do believe that it's one of the fields that can be quite good for getting people, regardless of ideology, into the political systems of this country, which I think we need more fresh blood, right? Like, I'll be honest with you guys. I think that it would be good to have more people in the local branches of politics that are
Yeah.
younger. I don't know about you, Jonathan. When's the last time you went to your local like Republican club in your area?
I'm in a pretty democratic city, so
Okay.
I don't even know if there is one. I'm in political groups on my campus, though.
Okay, so
Mm.
like, have you ever like engaged with some of like the old guard before from like the Republican Party?
Um, I haven't much.
Okay,
No.
this must be a
Like I
Democrat
said,
thing then. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Um, the thing with like college campus, obviously, you have to be a college student to kind of go back.
Yeah,
So once you graduate out,
you
you
can't
can't really
come. Yeah.
get back onto the campus very easily. Um, so I haven't affiliated much with them.
So,
Yeah.
like, I guess my anecdote on the matter, right, is I recently went to my Democratic Club for the first time because I needed to probe. We're looking for people that we could run and stuff like that for public defender and other areas. We're going for very low level office right now. And dude, I walked in there and I was the only person below 40 there. And it was incredible to me, right? They don't have the workforce of volunteers anymore, right? Meanwhile, look at my friends in the GOP, right? Like all my buddies are in the GOP, and it's like a legion of young people, all right? Like the Republican Party in Florida is just so powerful, and it has all these young kids in it, and that's something that was boosted through political science programs, right? So that's like the one thing I'll grant an exception to because it doesn't yield much money, but I think it's something that can like do these things. But the university system, just getting back on topic, in the realm of STEM is something that could produce so much wealth, right? So much so that I think that it could bring more wealth even into these communities alone, right? So it can go even above just like being in the middle class and can be like, engaging in your community more through the financing, through, like contributing to museums, public infrastructure, et cetera, right? These are things I want. But of course, I would be in favor of like telling people to go into the federal workforce, telling people to get into state workforce, telling people to go into trade school, and telling people to join the military. That's something I would, without a doubt, stand proudly and say to these kids, hey, this is something you need to do. And the idea that college is the only option is elitist and disgusting, right? And it's something that needs to die. So, yeah.
Stop right there. Yes, this is a little mini ad. Don't skip. Don't skip. All I want to tell you right now is that at the end of the day, when it comes down to all the discussions I want to have, I want to be able to communicate with you, the audience. I want to be able to relay a message and receive a message from everyone and try to come up with these great solutions that I keep on talking about. So if you want to be part of the community, make sure you go to the website and sign up for not only the email list so you can get weekly emails from me for the podcast episode, informational sessions, all that great stuff, but also sign up to go on my Discord so you can be part of the discussions, debates on my live streams. So be sure to go to the website www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com and go to the email list, sign up, and go to the Discord and join the server. Now back to the episode. Yeah. Um, I mean, these are a lot of great points, and I think the problem with you Dems over there is all your young people are in part of those social groups instead.
Yeah. Yeah.
The social advocacy. So
Nightmare.
it's man, it's something else for sure. But a lot of great points that was made in regards to these alternatives regarding affirmative action. I definitely think that obviously education, like you said, in terms of like schools, these minority schools, in terms of giving them more resources, establishing much more in terms of what they're about to do, what they're about to get into, even just creating programs and that kind of. I think you mentioned one when we were talking. I forgot the program that you mentioned that kind of helps you get prepared for college. I know that's definitely not something that's national wide because both schools that I went to didn't have that type of program. So establishing these type of things and for these specific individuals that are getting this slotted or getting the top percentage and getting chosen for getting full admission for said school, making it very obvious what they're about to get into, whether it's the higher education. And I think there's a way to kind of measure out their ambition too. I think at some point, at the age of like 17 or 18, you either kind of know what you want to do or you don't know what you want to do. And for me, when we talked about last time, I think if you don't know what you want to do, just going to college just cuz it's just not a good idea in my opinion. So that's when you provide options such as the military, provide options such as trade school. It's like you may not know what you want to go into, but these options will yield great benefits, be way cheaper, and you'll come out of it a going into a relatively successful life and you can for a relatively fulfilled life. You don't need to take the gamble. Maybe you'll find an interest and maybe you'll get a high paying job. So at that point of the 17, 16, 18 year olds, at that point, you can measure their ambition to a certain extent and give them these proper resources. We just obviously need to make sure that if we're creating these kind of alternatives, we give them the resources to do this. And the expectation, even though the internet exists and they all can research it themselves, the expectation for them to do these type of research is unrealistic. They're not going to do it unless you have like a parent that's like always like there for them, helping them every step of the way. But individually, especially in these minority communities, where more than likely their parents are not trying to help them and not really doesn't even really know how to help them in the first place, it's unrealistic for them to kind of be able to do this individually or even with their family members. So having programs to educate them on their options should be incentivized much more at the end of the day. So a lot of potential
Well,
ways that these minority communities can grow out of the situation they're in. I know you're about to say something, Jonathan.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, especially with an option like the military. If you decide you want to go, you don't know what you want to do. By the time you're 17, 18, you join the military. You serve a couple of years. They'll pay for your college when you decide. You know what? I do want to go to college. They'll pay for it, which is another great option. That's kind of getting the best of both worlds. So
And they give
that's
you a loan for a home as well.
they will. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different options for the military. You can go active duty, they'll pay for everything. You can go reservist where it's more part-time and they'll give you some money, more money depending on what branch you're in. Don't join the Marine Corps, probably join the Air Force. I'm just being honest and being completely objective here. So with that said,
Absolutely.
there you go, cosign right there. There's definitely options out there. If you are a high school student and you're really thinking, I don't know if I want to be a lawyer. I don't know if I want to be a doctor. Even if you want to be a politician or if you want to kind of learn more about political science, the discussion on if you should go to school just for political science is there. I definitely think people should be involved more in politics. But I think all that knowledge that they learn in college can be learned in high school, personally. So that's kind of where I fall in regards to that. So with that
I
said, go ahead.
I kind of agree with that. Like, especially like if you want to learn about political science, you could get the political science degree. I would say get like a political philosophy degree, which will teach you like the fundamentals of why we even have politics, as opposed to I know Paul will probably be irate with this statement, but a political science degree, I've taken a lot of political science classes, is a hyped up sociology degree. I know
Oh,
he's gonna hate that. He's gonna hate that. I know. Sorry. But like getting a classical education. I was just I had a guest on my podcast who's a classicist, and he gave a book that I don't have the top of my head, but I wrote them all down, where they did a study on STEM majors and then classical or liberal arts majors who went to medical school. And in the first year, the STEM majors did better, but in all the subsequent years of medical school, the classical educational, the liberal arts degree majors actually did better than the STEM majors in that particular field because they teach you how to think, they teach you the fundamentals of, pretty much everything. So in a classics or liberal arts degree, they kind of give you a background on anything and everything. And when it comes to politics, I think political philosophy falls under that classical degree, which you'll start with all of the great thinkers of the West and learn to think how they think, and then you'll actually get a better leg up.
Yeah, realistically, I mean, back in my other school before I kind of transferred, I was a poli sci philosophy double major. So I know we were
Mm.
talking about, and then I was like, I want to go to law school, and then it was like, by default I chose political science, but inherently it doesn't matter what major you choose. And then in reality, what I was learning is how the government work and the history of America. So I just like think those are probably just things you could just learn in high school, if I'm being completely honest. And but when you go into the more intricate thought processes like logic and reasoning course, for example, and like you said, political philosophy and philosophy in general, when you go into this level of like higher thinking, I think when you enter those stages where you really have to think very critically on how things work, those are things that will take time. I don't think these are things that an immature teenager will be able to understand. for sure. So I definitely get. I don't know if I 100% agree, but I definitely get what you're saying. That's what I'll say. I get what you're saying. Paul, you wanted to push back before we move on?
Yeah, of course. So just to like play defense for our good people, I think that it actually introduces a lot of problem solving skills throughout it, especially in our specific analysis of certain areas of the world, right? So obviously, if you take like a basic level, like 1,000 or 2,000 level political science class, you're not going to get anything from it, right? It's garbage. It's something that is just kind of like to maybe see if you're interested in the subject matter, and the professors just don't care whatsoever, right? But when you get into international relations stuff, for example, when you get into things like, for example, colonialism, post-colonialism, when you get into studies of things like nationalism, right? These are areas I think that actually yield a lot of very interesting problem-solving skills, not just because of like the historical example of those that kind of like did the problem solving themselves, but it makes the gears in your head turn and how you would make your ideal state. And as something that to like relate to it is something that can help you become like a better leader, right? Because you have like a different form of thought, because you have like you're like actually pushing yourself to be better. I'll tell you one thing, right, guys? Like a lot of kids in my class, they just like mirrored Marx all day, right? They would like talk about Marx or Engels. The people that are into philosophy would talk about Hegelianism, right? And for me, the number one thing that I always did was I always looked to these figures that we talked about in our classes, either good or bad. And I said, what did they get wrong? Right? Like, what was the problem with their experiment? I thought about it from the context of that an American, right? Why is the American experiment going so well? And the number one class that really made me start thinking about this was we did an entire class on Turkey, and it just fundamentally changed everything about the way I believe about like the nation and the state, like as a whole, right? And made me appreciate this. In Turkey, it's like a very secular atheistic state that brutalizes religious people. I'm very empathetic to the Muslim population there because of it, because I always say, what if it was me, right? But these are things that can really help that problem solving. Obviously, I will throw Jonathan a bone. I think some of the classical stuff can probably make you a little bit of a better problem solver just on like a per capita basis, right? But that being said, and I'm sure Jonathan would agree, political science can also do the same thing, maybe just at a lesser degree, right? To me, I just think that like I love the studies in general. I really like the people that go into the people that go into the stuff I can go into, which is being the bookworms and the researchers, right? Because those people play important roles in politics, in policy, and campaigning. And I think it's pretty good. Yeah. Granted, is it as good as some of the other stuff? Probably not. So yeah.
One thing I will add, just to kind of, side with Paul there for a second, I am sure that it varies vastly based on what institution you go to. So I guess I'll be gracious and backtrack a little bit. At my institution, a political science degree is basically just a sociology degree. And so I'm sure that other institutions have much better political science programs. I don't want to bash mine too much. I'm sure it is also good, but having encountered a lot of the political science majors, I don't have a lot of hope for my particular political science program. But I'm sure other ones are much better, and I'm sure it depends greatly based on what school you go to.
Oh, one more thing, just really quickly. I will say there's this like depressing thing that's happening to political science now, right? Which is it's like kind of like heading into this modem of or like this kind of like this like path, right? And there's like a fork at the road where you have to pick one or two. Back in the day, it used to be three, but I'll explain what the 1 and 2 is. So the first one is being a researcher, right? Which I have absolutely massive amounts of respect for, because the thing with political science research, unlike a lot of the sociology stuff, is that a lot of our studies can be replicated, right? And furthermore, the thing we always try to say is we don't try to say this is the way the things are, right? We just say this is the way things were at that certain time, and it's like subject to change, right? So you can do that, or you can become a lawyer, right? The problem with political science now is it's kind of like dipped off, and it used to be something where you could have an easy access straight into the political world as well, right? The number one thing that people that majored in political science back in 1965 would do is they would immediately apply for governments within the State Department, right? Now, obviously, I think that the institutions have suffered from some ideological depravity, right? I think that a lot of them suffer from, like some of the anti-Americans saber rattling and stuff like that, right? Or like some elements of Marxist indoctrination. But that being said, it's something that I think is hopefully going to come back after people realize that these two options aren't something that actually yields your program money, right? Because the political science programs throughout history have always been something that's been boosted by politicians themselves from both parties, right? I was very fortunate to meet a prominent GOP donor that actually donated around $300,000 to my school just to keep our program alive. And I mean, I'll tell you, man, like I'll reach across the aisle and kiss that guy on the forehead any day of the week, right? I'm absolutely glad that he graced my presence and helped my program, because I probably wouldn't have had the degree by the time if he didn't show up. So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Fair enough. Yeah, last thing I want to say before we kind of move on to the next topic is that I definitely think, very similar to what Jonathan said in regards to it depends on the institution. I do think it depends on how it's taught, of course. I mean, obviously, you can go down the route where it's like what happened, how it happened, but like Paul mentioned, what really is important for these discussions and what should be the most important once you hit the higher institutions, in my opinion, is why it happened. Why did this happen based on said XYZ? And that's more important because it obviously incentivizes critical thinking. I'm just really unsure how many institutions really focus on the why instead of focusing on how and what. So that's kind of the big concern for me, and then the added portion in regards to what Paul said in the job route. If you get a political science degree, is apparent. I mean, when I was getting in my political science degree, I was going the lawyer route, but in terms of anybody else that was doing the political science degree, I mean, they're kind of just like winging it. They knew they were interested in politics and and they got this degree, but it doesn't really guarantee that you're going to get in the political landscape unless you do like internships,
Yeah.
unless you do go and actually meet these individuals. If not, if you just go and apply for a job and say, I have a political science major, these places won't care. Like they won't care. So I do think that's a very interesting point, and I very much agree to that.
Well,
So we'll see.
something you said really stuck out with me. I guess there is like a fourth group of people that enter the program. There's this thing I noticed where it's people that can't get past their introductory level courses for like business and marketing, and they just like pick up political science as a means to like get through school. I'm sure, like Jonathan, you must have seen this in criminology as well, because I know sociology and criminology suffer from this stuff like rapidly as much as political science, right? Can you expand upon it by any chance?
There's a lot of people that enter the program and they wanted to do history, they wanted to do English, they wanted to do something a little bit more aggressive. And then or there's a couple people that I talked to that are just like, yeah, the pamphlet looked the coolest when they went through and like grabbed all and so they have no bearing. And so there's actually somebody who talks about this a lot. His name is James Lindsay. And he talks a lot about, this idea in education where all of these very low grade, college admins and these very low grade, low testing, I should say, students who go through the PhD, because some of these people who I just mentioned, who literally just thought the pamphlet looked the coolest, they ended up going and getting their PhD in criminology or in criminal justice or in sociology, and they're really not invested in the program. I'm sure this sort of thing happens with political science as well, and they just go through that program with actually no real passion for the subject. So they do horrible jobs in their dissertations. They just scrape by, but all they know is what they did their dissertation on. They never read a lot of the literature. And then that just perpetuates. And that's how we get a lot of these Marxist ideologies inside of schools, because the people who want to get their PhDs, sometimes they don't really do a very good job. They're just skating by. And then that's how we get these ideological, kind of just factories, I guess you could call them.
I think a bigger part that kind of contributes to it is just like with like the ideologues in particular, those are the people that usually actually get into the field of study because they have interest in it. The biggest issue I have is not like the Marxist or anything like that. The biggest issue I have are the people that sit idly by and just say nothing, right?
Yeah,
Because like at least the Marxists pick a side, right? Like
that's true.
at least
The
they have a
darkest place
position.
in hell is those who maintain their neutrality in a time of
I'm
moral
saying,
crisis.
right? Like it's like the bipartisanship conversation all over again, right? Like we have our differences, so what, right? Like this is like a real thing that exists, and you need to pick one. But dude, like I'll never forget, I did this international conflict theory class, and we had we did this like classroom activity where we had like do different nations, this sort of like model UN. And I was just in absolute complete control of my nation because my peers knew nothing what to do. They didn't know the policy of our nation, right? Which we had this previously read for. They didn't know about anything that was really going on, right? And granted, you know, like I wasn't even that enlightened per se. Like I wasn't even that engaged, but at least I still like put my effort out there. And it was the same for all the other groups, right? There'd be probably one person that kind of like carried the entire team, and it's really depressing to see because, like for example, whenever my professor would ask, like, "Hey, who wants to raise their hand?" I would be that weird kid that would stand up or like raise my hand and say, "Yeah,
Yep.
you know, I think I can answer the question, professor." And then when he wanted someone else to do it, no one else would do it at all. It's just sad, right? But the sad thing is that those are the people that keep
All
our.
my classes.
You were saying?
Happens in all my classes.
Yeah, exactly. And the sad part is that those are the people that also keep the program alive, right? And we're like stuck in this like funding trap where we have to like rely on lemmings that don't really care about the subject matter in the first place, just keep it afloat, right? While it's already like burning itself alive, you know? So like it sucks. Like it feels like there's nowhere to go. But I still am an optimist. And I still think that we can return to that like 50s, 60s era of political science. I'm not really sure what I could say for sociology, but I think that's condemned, unfortunately.
Let it
But
burn.
yeah, literally, I'm like watching like I'm watching Carthage on fire right now. Like, but like I don't know. Like I feel like it's something that could really produce a lot, especially considering that both parties are becoming so powerful now. And they're becoming significantly more motivated. Right, that's like the one thing I'll say that was so good about 2016 in particular is that I think they've said that party participation has gone up. Right, like more people are engaged in politics, and that is always good. Right, the more people that you have, that means the more goals that you can execute as your party, and that is always good. Right, it'll be especially great when we win this 2024 election. But I'm telling you, like it's something that
Good
rocks.
luck.
Hey, you'll see. Don't worry. But yeah, that's all I gotta say.
I man, it is also very interesting considering the like you said, participation has gone up, but then you can also argue the participation that has gone up knows way less about politics than in compared to like prior generations. They're fed all their political knowledge from social
From
media.
Twitter.
Yeah, so
You know, I'm gonna have to push back on this, Riddell. I really think that it's actually quite the opposite. People that were engaged in politics back in the day were pretty bad lemmings, like for the most part. Like you had some of like probably the poorest of the poor Americans working in these things with little to no education behind them. I will say they probably had more grounded ethics. Is something that's definitely true. But that being said, I really don't think the information was that good. I think now, if anything, it's actually a lot better with it. But because, like, for example, I read this like excerpt about a Democratic Party convention in I think it was like 1968. I think it was like the LBJ days, and a lot of the participants there would just blindly follow, quite literally, everything, and there would be no party disagreement. The only party disagreements that would ever arise were on the basis of if black people could vote or not within the Democratic Party, right? Nowadays, you actually see more dissenting opinions occur, right? And although I'm for party unity, I still think it's good because we still have an abundance of information out there. So that's my take on it.
that's actually a very good point. My kind of stance in regards to it is very much similar in the sense that the more people are getting fed the information in a very, very particular way. So that kind of goes hand in hand when you said in terms of grounded ethics. In terms of information, obviously they're getting more information, but due in part to social media, of course, and media in general, and the content that they're consuming in terms of the content creators feeding them their ideology, their point of view. Um, but I guess the question really is if we're growing in terms of people who are interested in politics, but kind of fed ideology in a specific way, and don't really know the intricacies of the politics that they're consuming, because, like we talked about, political science majors inherently is losing their value in a sense. Is that a good thing in terms of politics, or will that be a detriment for politics moving forward?
I think it's a mixed bag because, like I said earlier, right? The one thing that was good about some of the early days is that when you had people engaged in politics, people, I guess, felt less compelled to have like a voice, right? And they were more interested in like, like really duking it out, right? This is the thing I admire about the GOP currently, because everyone I know in the Republican Party, even if you don't agree with Trump or something like that, right? If Trump is the nominee, then Trump's the freaking nominee, and you don't just quit. Whereas with us, for example, I know people that just straight up dropped out of the campaign when Bernie lost, right? And it's just like, like, what are we doing? So I think that there are benefits to it. But at the same time, the thing that I do like a lot of this is that it's allowed for this massive amount of information to come through and deeply benefit the younger people in the party, like myself, that want to do a lot of restructuring and get rid of a lot of the cringe within the Democratic Party that we know won't be electable in the first place, that we know is just like genuinely stupid, right? Like, for example, the big thing that a lot of people like myself want to do is we want to get rid of the gun issue in the Democratic Party, right? We believe that the Democrats talking about guns all the time is just stupid, and it's something that's not worth our time. We believe that a lot of the resources produced like through the internet can actually help us in this, because the general form of thought that we've embraced with it is that this is something that is grounded in resistance against a tyrannical state, right? It's not something that's for just personal self-protection, and that's something that the internet has provided for us. So I think that's something that's actually really deeply benefited us in that regard, right? But it still has its negatives, right? I mean, party unity is really bad right now in our party, and we're still recovering from it, even while we own the administration.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, so I want to move on to the work aspect, because obviously when it comes to affirmative action, there's two ways you could think about it: affirmative action in the educational area, and obviously affirmative action in the workplace to make sure there's enough diversity, for, like we've talked about earlier, minorities and women to kind of catch up to the white men back in the day, of course. So when it comes down to affirmative action in the workplace, from what I found, they kind of go through a set of criteria in kind of picking people. They have the kind of top or headlines for each one, or analysis, comparison, responsibility, problem areas, corrective actions, and internal auditing and reporting systems. So the analysis part is that they go to a profile of that company that identifies the gender and race such as ethnicity of each employee in the context of an organization chart with the job roles. And I'm actually not going to read all of this, but just know that when it comes down to these, it's a lot more, it seems to me it's a lot more deliberate to make sure that the minorities or the women that they are hiring is not necessarily taking the jobs of the white person per se. What they're saying is they're trying to meet a threshold based on the labor force, to make sure that there's not a discrepancy of minorities compared to white people in the labor force versus what this company has, what this company is actually hiring into their workforce, if that makes sense. So that's how they approach it from my understanding. So in general, what are your thoughts, and do you think, because there's actually some concern from the left, do you think that affirmative action should or will, I guess you can answer both, should and or should or will get rid of affirmative action in the
Can you
workplace?
rephrase the question one more time?
I
I didn't
know
really
that was
follow.
that was a terrible question. So there's two parts of this question. Should affirmative action be taken out of the workplace? And the second part of the action is more so, what will the Supreme Court do? So will affirmative action be taken out of the workplace? So this is, one is based on your personal opinion, and two is based off the precedent of the educational system, and will this continue forward and take it out of the workplace moving forward?
You can go ahead, John.
So should it? I would say yes. And the reason, there's a plethora of reasons, I guess. One of the biggest ones that I would say a reason is because when they talk about, diversity, they don't mean the good kind of diversity in as much as diversity of thought, which is what all of the studies, everything has shown is good for innovation. So we have a lot of diversity of thought on this particular podcast. Between the three of us, we're all very different ideologically, or I wouldn't like to say any of us are ideological per se, but you know what my meaning. That is the good kind of diversity, the diversity that actually brings innovation. You can have a panel of people that have all different races and ethnicities, but if they're all of the exact same concept of thought, then it's not going to be a particularly innovative panel of anything. You can put that panel of people in any field, and they will not be any more innovative because they have different skin color. This is what Martin Luther King Jr. brought up, and he wants people to be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. The color of your skin doesn't necessarily say much about how you think when you're in America. It kind of does because of political polarization, but by and large, because we're kind of have the American culture here, different cultures will have different ways of thinking about things. But America is one of the only places where we kind of have this American culture that like there's not many other nations that have the level of diversity of ethnicity that we have in America, which goes to show that because of that fact, there's such a wide swath of ethnicities. Anybody can kind of think anything, and it doesn't really matter what your skin is not going to determine how you think about a certain thing. So hiring people as diversity being good based on the ethnicity is not good. It is not beneficial. It is not. It doesn't really serve a great purpose. It also, I think, the same similar arguments can be made on education. The same similar kind of arguments can be made for jobs as well. If you give somebody a job that they're not qualified for, they'll either quit or kind of sink that position because they're not qualified for it. They're not going to be competent at it. Doesn't mean they can't be eventually, though. Do want to clarify that. Just like with the educational thing, when you actually begin to hire somebody based on their merits, I think it does something psychologically when they know that I got this because I deserve to get it, and they'll be more eager to actually work up towards the higher position regardless.
Well, what do you think, Paul?
Well, so like obviously I'm like for it, right? But I'm kind of for it in like in the sense that like very like basic level jobs as well as like kind of like entry level jobs to the federal bureaus, for example, should have these areas that are there, right? Now, as for managerial positions, right, as for promotions, those should all be areas that are worked through and like people have to really show who they are, right? Having quotas for management is something that I'm just wholesalely against, right? Jonathan brings up a great point about creativity, and I think that's a way you kind of hinder it when you set up these expectations for people on the basis of just the way they look, right? But that being said, I want them to have representation in that workforce in the first place. I want them to be able to be in it, right? To give them the opportunity to be in it. And I think to give them the opportunity, I think is quite through a handout. That's like obviously democratic ethos, right? We believe in the welfare state giving it to them. Go ahead, John.
So I would ask, so what do you think about this? So my dad is in a position in which his area, his department, if they want more diversity, what they actually have to do is hire more straight white men.
Because it's like so diversified already, I assume.
Yeah, it's just replete with everybody but straight white men.
Yeah, so like I'm not necessarily like for that, right? Like I have like a very limited approach to it. The big thing I want, I guess like people would call it tokenizing in a sense, but it is I guess the way I would go through with it, right? I would want to have like a certain amount of quota for those getting into the agency, and then stopping it right then and there, right? Like after that, everything is through your own
So
individual
you
generation.
would not be pro hiring more straight white men so that it's actually, like an equitable outcome of that position?
Well, I think in the case of what your dad's like employment is like, I think that's definitely something that's more of the status quo extreme that's existing today, right? Mine would have significantly more controls upon it. For example, I wouldn't be filling gender basis for this. I wouldn't be filling sex for this. For me, it's all race and class, right? And it sticks and stays there. I don't believe in any of this stuff where they say we need to give like homosexuals more opportunity, right? These people already have opportunity. And you can call me a bigot for saying it, but the data agrees with me, right? So everything for me is just about class and race. And it sticks and stays there. So I guess to answer the question, sure, right? But within my parameters.
So I think there's something to what Paul said, and it's kind of like a more of a devil's advocate point, but I do think there's something to it, and more so the lower end jobs. Obviously, and like Paul said, in terms of like the higher end jobs, for the most part, those should all be merit based. But the lower end jobs, right, the very entry level jobs, where someone from a minority community might try to apply for example, a McDonald's or a job to, let's say they want to drive the UPS truck or be a truck driver or whatever. So something that I've heard is that sometimes there is some implicit bias when people are reading applications and they see a certain name. They see a name of a minority, a black person, and automatically assumptions are being made in their mind. And I could definitely see it because at the end of the day, in a perfect utopia, sure, I would say that all merit all the time. But in reality, these biases, especially in these more minority communities, is this guy might be a criminal because he has this name. And that assumption will enter a hiring manager's mind, especially one that doesn't have a level of structure to kind of make sure
Hmm.
this isn't the case. Right. And
Hmm.
these lower end jobs that there's no one going to be looking over their head to make sure that they're hiring certain people. If there's no affirmative action taking place, not all the
So
time anyway. So I've heard the argument, and I've seen I've heard the data in regards to it that there is some inherent bias against hiring people with a, for example, black name. So my question to you, Paul, in these circumstances, do you believe that having an affirmative action policy to make sure that this implicit bias is not there could help prevent these circumstances?
Absolutely, 100%. The presence alone is what shifts all social like social norms and policy in general, right? I think the exposure to Black Americans would be beneficial for these companies to stop this discrimination that actively occurs. Similarly to that, I'm sure you've probably read about the hair stuff as well, right? Where employers actively regulate Blacks' hairs. That's something that is just needs to go. I think that this policy, with the exposure, with the experience that is gained through working alongside members of this community, is something that could be very beneficial. Absolutely. Will
What do
it
you think,
actively?
Jonathan?
Will it absolutely solve the problem? No. Will it
Right.
help it a lot? Yes.
So this is a concept, and if it's okay, I'll play a little bit of a logic game that I got from reading these articles because they talk about this phenomenon, right? Of people reading the applications and then being less favorable towards minorities, and where this comes from is actually from affirmative action. Affirmative action is kind of the cause of this problem, and we'll get there in a second. What tends to happen is you have an affirmative action hire, right? So if this be in education, which is the context of this particular story that it was extrapolating, but you could kind of apply it to work as well. If you take somebody and their affirmative action hire, you take somebody and this who has a competency, let's say of 46%. So he's in the 46th percentile, so he's below average. But because of affirmative action, he gets a job that's much higher. And what happens is then that person, if it's in schooling, he might get additional assistance, right? But tutelage by the teacher. But during class, they're still teaching towards the majority of the class, which he still falls below in the 46th percentile. So they're teaching towards the middle of the class, and he's trying to get it, but he very quickly falls behind. Same could be said for work. If you hire somebody in kind of a middle position, but he's a little bit below average, affirmative action hire, he's not going to do as good of a job. Doesn't matter if the manager kind of helps him along a little bit when it comes to the day-to-day work, he just won't be able to do it because he doesn't have the proficiency for it. What will end up happening in both scenarios, whether it be work and education, is that person will drop out. He will quit, or he will leave. He will go to a different program, or he'll go to a different school. He'll quit and get a lower tier job that's more fitted towards his actual competency. And then what happens based on that is, oh, the stereotype was true. Minorities are a worse worker. They are more likely to quit. It reinforces all of those very same negative stereotypes that existed from the outset. And it's kind of a self-completing cycle with affirmative action, because affirmative action hire fundamentally is putting somebody who's not qualified for that job in that job. And then there's this mismatch. That's what the authors of that article and research call it. This mismatching is people who are not qualified for the job are getting the job. And this is more so the case for education, but it can logically be applied towards working. When it comes to working, there is a lot more grace, I would say, in that area, because you can do, depending on the position, you can do a lot more one-on-one work and try to help somebody up. But what would be better in the first place is to get rid of those kind of policies and make sure that you're going to get somebody who is actually competent for the job. And when you're not trying to artificially bolster numbers of particular people, I think they'll actually naturally draw up when you treat them like they want to be treated and deserve to be treated, which is fairly and equally under the law, but you're not trying to make them something that they're not. We had this discussion with politicians. We have a big issue with making people into somebody who they are not. When you try to do that, people know fundamentally that I did not get this job based on merit. They inherently know it, and they inherently act that way. And if you have somebody who knows that they're not actually qualified for the job, they're not going to all of a sudden become qualified for the job because they got the job. You earn the job, and then you do well at the job, you excel in the job, and you earn the promotion.
Well, although it might be true that there are many circumstances in which there is like negative stimuli that is associated with blacks because of the after effects of after effects of affirmative action, I still think that the primary area by which we should try to solve this problem is through affirmative action, right? I think that the negative stimulus is something that's going to always exist there because it is going to be a natural consequence of it, right? That being said, these are things that are just genuinely grown out of over time, right? We saw it with social factors that had already
It started
occurred.
in the 1950s, though, and we're still facing the negative consequences of it.
Sure, at a
I don't think we grew out of it.
at a much lesser level, though, right? You and I would both agree we've taken quite a few miles in our shoes, and we've gotten pretty far. Correct?
On the basis of affirmative action,
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's had a net negative effect.
What were the primary reasons why whites did not hire blacks going into the 1950s? I can tell you, it was on the basis of quality of work. It was It was on the basis of criminality. It was on the basis of mixing the races, and it was on the basis of just like general anti-integrationist policy. Right? We have now moved into an area where only two of these things somewhat remain. Right? And I say somewhat with a very heavy S on it, right? I believe that this is something that is still beneficial. And although it might be true that there is going to be negative association that occurs because of the handout that is given and what it associates that group of people with, I still think it's a necessary thing to happen, right? I think it's something that we could eventually bleed out, especially if we make it something like, for example, if we can't pass it all the way through as a mandated thing and it has to go into a volunteer thing, if we give businesses subsidies for it, I think that's something that could especially sweeten up the deal. Yeah.
So a few caveats I don't want to make in regards to what you said, Jonathan. And in general, personally, I don't think it you could say it was a net negative personally, because like what Paul said, the initial reason why it was implemented in the first place is because of the discrimination for both, women and minorities. So obviously, initially the idea wasn't even to make it to the point where they have placement holds, where a certain amount of XYZ needs to be put in place. That's something that was established a little bit later on. But the idea is to prevent these terrible communities where, especially that are kind of lingering from the effects of maybe a Jim Crow period, or just maybe a period where they just really just don't like a certain type of minority communities. And especially when you look at education, I mean, the amount of women that are getting an education and succeeding, I mean, it's at the point where they're kind of trumping men at this rate, right? So in general, I think it's done what it's done. I think at this point it's gone too far, and because of it, we got rid of it. Obviously, in the workplace, I think that's a little bit more nuanced. I did say prior that I agree in a mid-level job, affirmative action shouldn't be like a part of that. So I'm kind of trying to focus more so on the entry level ones, because the people we're trying to help are the minority communities. These are the communities that we're trying to help, because the people who are like middle of this, a middle class or whatever, they should be really focusing on what they're capable of doing, and they shouldn't be struggling in a situation where they're incapable of getting any job. So the minority communities where they're struggling in whatever situation, whether it's supporting your kids, whether it's being in an environment full of crime, whether it's trying to put food on the table, they obviously need jobs. And they obviously, if they are discriminated at any point throughout their job process, that can definitely ruin the livelihood of everybody they're taking care of. So what we're trying to prevent with a potential policy is that these entry level jobs, which inherently require little to no skill. Let's be honest, you don't need to be skilled to work at McDonald's, right? You don't need to be. And you learn a skill very quickly. We're going to make sure that this hiring manager, which again, let's be honest, these hiring managers for a like McDonald's or something aren't inherently the most reliable people. So we want to make sure
Yeah.
that their implicit bias doesn't get in the way of hiring
Here's
a
here's my
fair
question.
amount of people into that position. Go
I
ahead.
I totally understand the idea. My question is this: practically speaking, is McDonald's the place that's going like those low level jobs? Are those the places that are discriminating based on names? Probably not. Anybody can go get a job at a McDonald's, just about, just about. They can go get jobs at these places. It's, I would argue, and I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. I haven't looked at the numbers. I haven't looked at the statistics. I'll be honest with that. But if I was a betting man, I would bet that it's those kind of institutions that are not the ones suffering from that implicit bias. It's the higher up jobs that are going to do that anyways. The people who are hiring for the managerial staff, the people that are hiring, like my dad is a very high level professor, and he's the one who they are discriminating. They're the ones who actually have the funds to be able to use affirmative action, because to some extent, those lower level places, they don't have a lot of money to just throw around and waste on. I wouldn't say waste, that's a strong word, but they're not the ones, let's say, they're not the ones who are suffering from those issues. They're just hiring whoever they can get, especially right now when the places like, I mean, the Taco Bell down my street is paying like $18 an hour for people to just work in their kitchen. They're not the ones really discriminating. It's the higher level jobs that are the ones who are using affirmative action anyways.
Right. So, like I said, in those situations, then I'm fine with kind of removing it because I think
Mhm.
me and Paul both said that once you're starting to move up, once you're starting where these skills are much more valuable, it should be completely merit based, right? So I also can't really tell you the perfect statistics because this is something that I've heard, and this is something that I've heard the data points in regards to this, and obviously there's all papers that you've seen in regards to it as well, but the measure of putting this policy in place is to prevent an action that could potentially take place, because at the end of the day, in these situations where a potential discrimination situation could happen, because to say I'll agree in a lot of areas more than likely they'll just hire whatever, but let's say there's an area where there's a lot of crime for, certain minorities, whether it's a Latino or a black person, and then they see someone with that's Latino or black trying to apply, and there's going to be an automatic assumption. So we got to have preventable measures in that circumstance to make sure that they're not kind of hiring based off their feelings. And I just don't believe, and I think you said
So
it too, I don't believe there's enough checks in terms of top down to prevent them from hiring on their feeling because it's a low
so I
level
got a
job that
question.
people don't really care about.
I have a question for both of you. I've actually been reading a book by a guy named Thomas Sowell, who has done a lot of who's done a lot of research, and
Thomas
I know.
Sowell, yeah, I know who he
So
is. I know who he is. Okay.
yeah, so he actually talked about the idea how when people stopped doing criminal background checks, black people, particularly black people, minorities in general, actually got less jobs because they did exactly what you just said. They made assumptions. They assumed that black people, oh, they're going to commit more crimes, they're not going to hire them. But more black people actually got jobs when they did criminal background checks, even though certain political parties did not like that concept. And the same sort of thing bore out with affirmative action in schooling. There was actually more people, very marginally different, slightly more people at UCLA that actually got in, of minorities that got in and actually graduated when they got rid of affirmative action, because it gave people a feeling that I'm actually getting this job based on my merit. I'm actually getting this degree because I earned this degree. More of the actual 80th, 70th, 90th percentile minorities accepted invitations to UCLA when they knew that they were not admitting based on affirmative action because they wanted that prestige that goes with it. I think the same thing bears out when it comes to jobs. When you're saying we are not hiring based on affirmative action, you will get more people who apply because I think people inherently want the prestige and the pride, the good kind of pride that comes with getting a job based on your merit.
Go ahead.
I don't have much to say to it because I'm not necessarily familiar with the rest of the argument, but I will agree with Jonathan. I think Solo makes a great point on the background check thing. It was a mistake of the Democratic Party, right? I'll be completely honest about it, and it was completely. I think our heart was in the right place, but it didn't really work out. The best thing about these background checks is that they actually gave kind of black people a way to prove their innocence, right? Like it gave them the ability to say, I
And
am not a criminal.
I want to clarify. I think it's a tragedy that that's a necessary step, but we live in a fallen world,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
unfortunately, at some point, we do have to be pragmatic. I think it's a very tragic thing that that is necessary in the first place,
Yeah.
but it is.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've seen a couple of discussions with Thomas Sowell as well, and I also agree with the background checks. Like, it's another way to make sure that they don't have to rely on affirmative action, like you said. And I think that, any way to make sure that the right people are getting the job should be put in place. So I'm for that as well. Thomas Sowell's also talked about a lot of other things in terms of welfare. So that's a discussion in the future when we start talking about welfare. And curious on
Please.
curious on thoughts regarding that, of course. My I guess my last question before we wrap things up is when it comes down to these more, how do you feel? I guess this is a better way to frame the question. How do you feel about organizations out there that hire based on very specific kind of ideologies. And I'm not talking about like a Democrat just hiring Democrats or Republicans just hiring Republicans. I'm talking about in the situations where even beyond that, and not just ideologies, but just identities in general, where we have women groups just hiring women, or black people just hiring black people, or LGBTQ just hiring LGBTQ people for their organizations. How do we feel about potentially more and more groups kind of hiring the people that kind of are similar to them? How do we feel about that going forward?
It's a nightmare. I'll tell you this, like plain and simple, right? It's something that doesn't actually pan out that well. This, what's my English isn't too good in this. Uh, this, how do you say like hegemon or no? What's the word?
Hegemony
No,
or
no, no, no,
hegemonic?
no, not hegemonic. An entire group of like one peoples in one area. What's the word for it? I think it starts with an H. I forgot. Whatever.
I mean,
The
hegemony works.
Yeah, like there's like hegemony of like one people's in an employment area. Is pretty bad when you do get a very talented person that's not of that group, right? I'll tell you, I've worked with some very liberal people who gave me a hard time. I felt like I was actively discriminated against. I was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People for a while, and it was good. I liked it a lot. And then I moved into something that was very different from that, and I deeply regretted it. Right, I was picked on for being white, and it was something that I found to be an absolute nightmare. Similarly, this is something that kind of buzzes in the circles that I'm in. Are you guys familiar with a lot of the Vet TV controversy and the Black Rifle Coffee Company controversy that's been going
I
on?
I do know I love Black Rifle coffee. Tastes delicious.
Yeah.
So I do know some of that. You might have to tell me which
So,
particular
you know what they
scandal
did
because
to that
there's.
one
Oh,
employee that they hazed?
I did not hear about that. No.
Yeah, so they had, I think he was an airman, or no, he wasn't military at all in the
Mhm.
company. And they actively were threatening this guy. They were forcing him to drink large amounts of alcohol, and he was a Christian, right? They were bullying and pushing this guy around. And I think that this, like, these atmospheres where it's like just one big group. The only exception I do, of course, is a political party because that's the way it has to be, right? That's like the way a party is.
Yeah.
For any other form of commerce, right? I think it's an absolute nightmare. And I think it yields some very bad results because it leads to people getting picked on. It leads to people's civil rights being infringed upon in a lot of cases, in my opinion. I don't think it's something that's good. I think that, freedom of association can only go so far in that regard. And I think that it's something that can breed toxic environments. Maybe if these environments don't hire anybody at all, that's of the different group, right? Then you know I'm still going to be against it, but I'll bite the bullet in terms of the argument and saying that it won't be as bad because that those people I talked about earlier won't get picked on because they just won't be there. But I'm still like somewhat against it in virtue of the fact that I think places can grow in an environment with lots of ideas. Yeah.
So, Jonathan, before you answer that question, to kind of add on to the final point that Paul made, to kind of elaborate a little bit more, if a circumstance where they hire only their people, does that meet that kind of threshold of the diversity of ideas that you were even talking about?
So actually, that's the point that I was going to bring up. I think if you want to create that kind of culture, I'm not particularly familiar with the instance of that Paul's referencing with Black Rifle Coffee. I like Black Rifle Coffee. It's not my favorite. I prefer the coffee I roast myself because I'm a snob. But it is good coffee. I'm not familiar with that. With those kind of instances, I feel terrible if it happened. Military people I know have their kind of carousing lifestyle that I would probably be pretty scandalized if I went and
Yeah.
just worked with a bunch of military people. I would probably find it maybe kind of crass and could kind of blow that out of proportion a little bit. If it is like you said, I think that's a horrible thing. I just want to make sure that I state that for the record.
Were
I
they
think if you
Marines? I had to ask. Were they Marines?
A lot of them
Rifle's got
are.
everybody.
Of course they're
Yeah.
Marines. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
just a caveat before you say what you're to say, so people know that I'm not just picking on Marines, even though I want to. I used to be a Marine, so I know what I'm talking about. So
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
go ahead.
I posted a lawsuit for you, by the way, Jonathan. You can take
Oh,
a look at the
beautiful. Thank
Discord.
you. Yeah, I know they've got they have had a lot of lawsuits because people don't like them for some reason. They do kind of put off a strange vibe that I'm not a huge fan of. I like supporting veteran owned businesses. The coffee I typically like to buy is from a local veteran owned businesses because I'm big supporter of shopping local. But if you want to have that kind of business where you hire kind of your people, I think that's totally your right. If you want to do that, I don't know that that's always the best business practice, though, right? And I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and his book, The Infinite Game. Great business advice there, and he talks about that sort of diversity of ideas. And if you're just going to get all of your people in I'm only hiring from this pool of people, I don't know that that's the most practical and prudent thing for you to do. You can do it if you want, and Black Rifle Coffee is pretty successful. I think they'll probably never, because they kind of boxed in their own market. So they'll never really, because I know people that refuse to buy Black Rifle Coffee simply because they're like a pro gun, sort of rabble rousing kind of crew. And so they've cut off large swaths of their market because they do that. And I think the same sort of thing happens with Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is an explicitly Christian company. And they have some forays into liberal stuff every once in a while. I think there was a scandal going on recently with that kind of thing. But I know people that will not shop at or will not buy at Chick-fil-A because they're a Christian company and because of the principles they stand behind it. So I think there's arguments to be made when you do kingdom-based companies, but that's because I'm a Christian, and so I believe that God will bless your efforts when you dedicate things onto Him. But that's my own beliefs there. Take for what you will. But in principle, having that diversity of thought will make you more innovative.
Okay, so you're saying legally it's fine, principally you don't agree with it.
Yeah, legally it's fine. Even like in principle, like you can do it if you want, but I don't think it's prudent. I don't think it's wrong, but I don't think it's a prudent, let alone a business savvy move to make all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in the same boat as well. Obviously, I don't know where I stand in terms of like legislation on it because I think it can be a very shaky subject. The word I was looking for was homogenous, by the way, earlier.
Oh
Oh
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think I'm with Jonathan on that. I didn't know you were a Marine though, Riddell. It's pretty interesting. We should talk after the podcast a little bit.
I got you. Yeah, I mean legally I see what you mean. Principally, I disagree. I think it's horrible. I think all echo chambers are horrible ideas. Every single one of them. I'm not a fan of any of them.
Well, except
So,
parties, right?
I mean, I don't affiliate with either. So, nah, I'm not good with either of that either.
Okay.
So, I don't like it. I guess the only thing with parties, I think I would say is as long as we have a good number to challenge them. Democrats and Republicans can challenge each other, but I think we've talked about it before. I don't remember, Paul, you were on, but like the idea of a third party could definitely help in terms of making sure those ideas are challenged properly. So with that said, for the most part, I think the argument can be made for parties, but for the most part, yeah, I'm not a fan of echo chambers for the at all. And it really has to be like an echo chamber to the point where like I agree with everything that you're saying right now, and that's when a big problem.
I actually don't think that's possible. I don't think like because we're all humans, we're all individuals. I think but that happens, right? Not saying I'm saying that happens, but I don't think it's always possible for someone to be like, I agree with every single thing that you're saying. I think you are just kind of giving yourself over to that ideology because, like, well, it fits enough, so this is just who I am now, and it gives people
Yeah,
a sense
not
of identity.
everything, but principally everything
Yeah.
is my thing. Like an example where it's like let's use the military one where it's a bunch of Marines. So it's a bunch of Marines. Yeah, they're gonna have their arguments. One guy's gonna be a Cowboys fan, the other one's gonna be a Steelers fan. But when it comes down to their principles, when it comes down to military, when it comes down to America being the number one country, when it comes down to gun rights, they're all going to be the same in regards to that stuff for the most part. So that's kind of what I mean in regards to that. But yeah, that's basically all we got for today. I think. Oh, I guess you guys didn't answer, and you guys can answer this pretty quickly. Will affirmative action be removed from the workplace after what happened to education?
Yes.
I think yes in kind of theory, but no in practice.
What makes you kind of believe that on like the practice angle?
So based on the same thing that Justice Roberts did with his opinion, as he created that loophole, I think the same thing will happen. So even though in technically in theory affirmative action is banned, in practice it won't be. I think the same thing will happen with jobs.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. The stipulation did kind of damage the possibility for it to go away. So I could see that.
Yeah, so we'll see. It's going to take a couple years before you kind of see the ramifications of affirmative action to see if it was a good, if it was a bad idea. But you know, at the end of the day, I think the mostly for the workplace in a way, I think this will mostly be important for, like I said, the lower level jobs, the smaller businesses, the local owned businesses. For the big corporations, they will always approve diversity. We know that they will
Yeah.
always approve diversity. So it really doesn't really, that's not going to change. So we'll see what happens, of course. So that is all we got for today and today's episode number 30. Tune in for next week. I'll give you guys a little hint. We got some great talks. We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about more America stuff. Maybe next Thursday we can have the welfare discussion potentially. We'll see. It should be an interesting conversation. But hope you guys enjoyed per usual. Rate it 5 stars if you did. 4 is okay, but rate it 5 stars. Visit the website, donate if you want, leave a voice message criticizing one of us. You know, you can criticize Jonathan
Probably
if
be
you
me.
want. Yeah,
Yep.
if you're a
This tweet is
progressive,
stupid. Yeah.
if you're progressive, you can criticize Jonathan all you want. And we'll laugh at it here on the show. No slurs though. I don't approve of slurs. You know.
Ha.
So with that said, hope you guys enjoyed. Y'all have a good one. Take care. And welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown. I am glad you are here, and I'm glad you are listening to today's podcast episode. My mission in each and every one of these episodes is to really focus on the solutions to some of the biggest questions and most controversial topics going on in our current society. I feel like most of these conversations are not truly being discussed in a more logical and respectful manner due to the political toxicity that goes on with both the left and the right, both the Democrats and the Republicans. In this podcast, I don't care about any of that. I am focused on the solutions. I'm focused on bridging gaps. If you want to join me on this journey, if you want to discuss some of the most important topics, if you are tired of the political toxicity and negativity from both sides, please support this channel, share the podcast, and go to my website, www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com. I appreciate the support. I'll continue to make content, and hopefully we can start bridging these gaps and focusing on real issues going on in our world.